Good afternoon. This is Muslim Network TV, and I am the host, Professor Amin Al-Din of Critical Talk. Today, we're talking about education, and it's not that this is a little talked about issue, concern, but it has myriad questions, all from the first days of the pandemic and getting kids computers to be able to get online with teachers who hadn't quite figured out how to do that, to more in depth questions, students not showing up when they were supposed to be online, and parent angst at trying to keep students engaged while they were doing their classwork or their homework, etc. We've had problems from preschool to the university, and some of the problems are quite old, and some of them have been specific to the pandemic and the largely remote learning or the toggle learning. 2 weeks you're in school. Oh, I think we're going to go to school. Nope, we're going to go back home and do some more remote learning, which has happened both in elementary and high schools and also in the university. Today, I am very, very honored to have with me two women who are going to tackle some of these issues. First, I have Professor Layla McLeod, who is an assistant professor of college student personnel at Western Illinois University. She studied the academic and professional socialization of minoritized college students. She has a PhD in higher education and student affairs from the University of Iowa. Second, I have Amina Mitchell, who's a doctoral candidate in at the University of Illinois at Chicago's Department of Educational Psychology. I should be really, really stable when I get off this program. She is a retired high school guidance counselor. As a member of the book club, which is a book club, we have a Black Women's Book Club. She is looking at these issues plus many more. The where I want to start with is if you can sit back and think about the beginning of the shutdown. How did your families begin to think about ramp up your supplies, your resources, etc., for at home learning? Because parents and grandparents both had to contribute. Doesn't matter to me which goes first.
Well, I mean, I can begin as someone who has a middle school age child at home. I think the first thing that I was thinking about is not only like the physical space that we would need to learn at home, like making sure that he had a designated area for learning. What additional tools would we need? So, making sure that, he's fortunate enough where he has a personal laptop, but the school district provided additional laptop. But the actual physical space was set up in a way that was conducive to learning. I think that was the first thing on my mind. It's like, okay, we go from leaving the house to learn every day to now you sleep upstairs and now you're going downstairs and you're supposed to be in school, helping my student understand the differences now that all of that was taking place in one space. So I think for me, and I realize my privilege in this is that we live in a home where he can have a separate space for his at-home life and his school life. So I think one of the first things, there's a lot going through my mind, but one of the first things was like, how do I set up a dedicated space that is comfortable, but also conducive to learning at home?
So, what does that mean? Space conducive to learning? Because your moms were on the ground. Amina and I are grandparents. So, while we were not on the ground, we were kind of trying to orchestrate and stick our 2 cents in from a distance. But for you moms on the ground, what does that conducive space look like? What do you put on the walls? What chair furniture do you make available?
I think that's part of what
Mhm.
from the long distance because again I wasn't there all the time, but it seems that was a, a I won't say a problem but a puzzle, at least for my grandchildren and my son and daughter-in-law, was how do you navigate all of this along with uh, working remotely. So they ended up uh, I think they've tried a couple of things, but I think early in the pandemic they they got a whiteboard and started putting up schedules and
Mm-hmm.
saying, okay, this is what you're supposed to be doing at this time, and this
Mhm.
is where we're going to have lunch, and this is when you're allowed to have free time. How well that worked with 11-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old. It was, I think the 11-year-old got away with more than he's ever gotten away with. The
Mm-hmm.
6-year-old and the 3-year-old, they eventually realized they could not work and have a 6 and 3-year-old in the room in the same house with them while they were working. So they ended up going to the daycare center when it opened.
I see you nodding your head. Uh, Layla, join in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was really important for me, at least, was to realize that I could not recreate school at home, right? So I think initially it was like, oh, get up, be at the table to work at 9 o'clock or and work for until 3. That does not work. At least in my household, it didn't work. And I realized, so my child was fully online. So I know, throughout the state of Illinois, there are different school districts have different ways of doing it. So there's hybrid option where he could go to in-person learning twice a week, and then days home do something else. He could be homeschooled. Illinois has very flexible, almost non-existent homeschool rules, so anybody can homeschool, which is really fascinating to dig into. It was something I was considering at one point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but he was fully online with a third-party vendor, so he could do his assignments at any time. He could do them 10 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock in the morning. And knowing my child is not a morning person, has never been a morning person, it didn't make sense now that we were at home to try to recreate the schedule that he would have if he were attending in person. So for me, and I realize he's older, he's almost 14 versus, folks that have 3-year-olds and 6-year-olds, different levels of energy and ways that you have to monitor them. So for me, it was just letting some of that go. I was, also while he's learning from home, I'm also teaching from home. We have pets all over the place. And so there's lots of different things going on. And I just realized for both of our sanity, I could not recreate what he would get in traditional school setting at home. And I think once I let that go, we were both happier. you know, maybe you'll do 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, right? Let's go take a break and go for a walk. And I realized as someone who has that a flexible work schedule that I can do that with him. But I found that worked better for learning in a pandemic or during a pandemic.
Yeah, my daughter, she was very ambitious, and she set up
Can
a
you
little.
speak up just a little bit? I'm not sure I can hear you.
She was very ambitious, and she tried setting up a workstation for her 5-year-old and her right beside her. So they were sitting together,
Mm-hmm.
and that didn't work. So she also has a newborn. So the newborn, that was the easiest part because she went to sleep. But the 5-year-old, what she would do is she just get up, whether they were doing whatever they were doing on screen. She'd get up and say, I need a snack," and want to go to and want to go to the kitchen and get a snack. So the last time that I talked to her, she mentioned that she had moved upstairs with the baby, and then the 5-year-old was downstairs while her dad was on line with his work.
Mhm.
And she said every once in a while, her daughter would pop in to see
Talking
what.
anyway.
That's right, pop in. And part of that was because she was learning a whole different way of going to school, where she had been used to Montessori.
Mhm.
Now it was more of a, uh, traditional type of kindergarten, where she was expecting, we all were expecting her to be part of a kindergarten at Montessori.
Well, one of the things that Layla mentioned, which I think is critical, and that is those who had privilege and those who did not, who do not did not, but do not. Um, and for many, living in apartments where everything is on one floor, living in, I wouldn't really call it overcrowded, but living in close quarters. Some of them were actually overcrowded, but living in close quarters. And one of the things that this change in education did was it brought out disparities. It brought out parents' knowledge of what resources are. We have been chatting along here, and it is time for us to take a quick break. Please feel free to get your water, get your coffee, get your tea, and because we got lots to discuss. This is Professor Amina Al-Din with Critical Talk, which is a production of Muslim Network TV, and we will be right back.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an
Our neighbors don't
eye-catching
realize
message.
that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No me! No justice! No me!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world? You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward. That lesson learned have brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
This is Professor Amina Al-Din with Critical Talk, a production of Muslim Network TV, and I have the honor this afternoon of speaking with Professor Layla McLeod and Amina Mitchell. I want to say my own name, please forgive. I want to leave and I want to go back to a little bit later the issue of resources. But I want, from what you know, for you to tell me what is a liberal education? Not a liberal arts education, but a liberal education.
Well, I'm going to say that, when I think of education, I don't think of it as liberal or not. I just think of it as education. Um, my philosophy of education is all children can learn, and that some of them learn at different
Layla,
rates.
scoot back to your left.
They learn at different rates and in different ways, but they all can learn, and that's the mandate that I think the teacher should have, that you facilitate that learning.
Layla?
Sorry, I had to mute myself. Yeah, I think so. To go back to your initial question about what is, and I understand it more so as a liberal arts education. I understand, and I say this as someone who specifically studies post-secondary or higher education, that the purpose of education is to provide a breadth of information, right? So if one of the outcomes of pursuing a college degree is that it's supposed to make you a better citizen, right? It's supposed to make it so that you know how to engage with people or ideas that are different from you, right? So that we learn how to live together on earth. And to go back to Sister Amina's point about anybody can learn, everyone should have access to this information. How do those things come together if we're supposed to be on this planet together? So that's how I understand liberal education within the US context, is that we're trying to stay on this planet together. And so in order to do that, we have to know a little bit about a lot of different things and be able to converse and hear ideas that are different from ours, be able to engage in a civil discourse when we have differences of opinions, but it ultimately so that we can be on this planet together in a respectful way. That's how I understand the purposes of particularly higher education.
And elementary and high school are supposed to hone you in some way or make you open to those ideas. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the building blocks, right? And so when we think about higher education, particularly the founding of higher education, so Harvard University is the oldest institution in this country, oldest, what we now would consider post-secondary education institution in this country. When Harvard was founded, there was no such thing as high school, right? The education you got at the college level at that time was the equivalent of what we now consider high school. And so thinking about now we have these building blocks to help people get to that higher level of thinking about how to be a citizen. And so I think some of that citizenship training does begin in P through 12 educational settings, right? How do you, thinking about the Montessori school, how do you take care of your environment? Some of those practical skills about how to move through the world, but also just
how to live with
sharing, right? How to share, right? How to manipulate, I'm trying to think of blocks, how to build, right? Some of those things you learn at a very young age. And I think with each level, it just becomes a little bit more complex.
Okay. Now let me push a little bit. Now we haven't finished suffering through an election where one of the things that was talked about was liberal education, liberal politics, this big tent philosophy of the Democratic Party. And the Democrats were talking about the need to educate, meaning make you be on my side, of the Republicans. Sometimes, some of them, I'm not talking about in general. So how am I, the everyday listener, say with a good, solid high school education, supposed to liberal is thrown about and bandied in so many ways that I can't grab it. Don't y'all see?
Yeah. You don't grab. Well, usually when I hear liberal, I just gloss right over.
You're at the gloss over.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's become one of those terms that people use so much, nobody knows what it means.
Exactly.
Taking the life out of it. And so I do think it's up to us to kind of reframe it, that it's not about a political ideology. It's about just, for me at least, it's about how do we want to be with each other, right? If we believe that God made us all different so that we would come to know each other and see like who he is, then you shouldn't be opposed to this type of education. It should be an opportunity for you to say, wow, there are over 7,000 languages spoken on this planet. So that means there are 7,000 different ways to understand how people can communicate with each other.
Right.
That's beautiful to me. That's not something to be nervous or afraid of, right? And so again, when we think about someone who maybe doesn't have a college education, I always say that college degrees don't mean that you're just inherently smarter than someone. It just means that you stuck with something, right? So I say that
literally,
right? It just means that you stuck and just kept going, right? So when we think about the language that we use and how do we make it more accessible, I think it is, one of the hopeful outcomes of high school education is that you learn how to decipher sources, right? Or that you learn how to do a search. I'm not just saying using Google, but to gather information for yourself and decipher between what's accurate and what is or factual or how people's paradigms or understandings of the world impact the information that they put out.
Yeah,
Right?
but in order for you to know you can, want to, where is this incentivization coming from for you to want to go and learn something new and different? I mean, we saw that on the streets in cities and towns across this country. People didn't want, I don't want to know your buns. I want to stay in my bubble. But is that because
Would you
parents,
not? But I would say that social media has made it easy for all of us to stay in our bubbles. We choose who we follow. We choose what channels we watch. We all make these decisions, right? So if I choose to watch CNN over MSNBC over Fox, that's a choice that I'm making. The additional labor of processing what they're saying, I have to do that work on my own, right? But we all make choices to stay in our bubbles. It's just sometimes that we feel better about certain bubbles over others.
yeah,
I don't know.
but you both in two different ways were talking about the process of education, teaching us how to be relational citizens, right? Who knows that but you guys? I mean, is this something you're conveying to parents? Is it in a brochure I skipped? You know, how do we understand this big picture philosophy of
Some of,
education so we can join you?
some of it is right in the mission statement that every school and every school district must have.
Mission statement. I
Mission
didn't see a mission
statement.
statement until I got to college. But okay.
But well, I can tell you that in my school, can't speak for everyone, that the mission statement was so important that we put it up on a banner as you
Oh,
there,
okay.
so
Okay.
that everybody understood what the mission was for administration, for teachers, for parents, and students. And
That's awesome.
every school's required to have something like that. Now,
Oh, I'm sure they can have it,
whether
but
or not they publicize it in such a manner as we did is another story. But they all got it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, how they convey that message is a different story. But they all got to have it. It's kind of it's like saying your prayers before you go to bed.
okay.
You're required to at least look like you are.
That's a really good point, though, right? Like, I think that for me as a faculty member, I try to have these larger conversations about why do we do what we do, right? And but it's me as the educator trying to pull students to that and also modeling how to have those conversations. So like you said, the information is out there, but how people make those connections for folks is a whole nother story. It's a whole nother conversation.
Well, I'm looking now, and this is what I want you to consider as we take our next little short break. We're looking now, it is said, you can tell me whether you believe it to be true or not, that now America is seriously divided, much like it was during the Civil War. The question may or may not be different over who's going to be slave and who's going to be free, just maybe being expressed in different terms. But nevertheless, America is very divided. I want to say that I see something which I consider sinister going on in the divisions in educational resources, kinds of education, access, etc. So I want you to think about that, and we're going to take another quick break. This is Professor Amina Al-Din with Critical Talk, a production of Muslim Network TV, and I am jabbering with Layla McLeod and Amina Mitchell. We'll be right back.
Assalamu alaikum.
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. 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 And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam is and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is very smart.
Download the new Adam's World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
We are back with Professor Layla McLeod and Amina Mitchell. This is Professor Amina Al-Din, and we're talking about as many things as we can think of to talk about regarding education. I left you with what I really think as I look out and I see private schools, English, French schools, private religious schools, public schools, charter schools, magnet schools, and the regular old public school. I see public, private universities, and a huge number of, what do they call it? For-profit, always been online kind of universities. And it's a smorgasbord. But the quality of education does it suffer? But depending upon which route you can afford, which route you make yourself afford by what you're willing to sacrifice to get your kids on some track. And how the hell do you figure out one track from the other?
That's a lot of questions.
I guess is the question about just the diversity of learning opportunities for students?
Yeah.
Okay. Sister Amina.
I think that part of it is it comes back to what are you trying to do? What a parent is trying to do? Because what happens is that yeah, that's my phone. I'm trying to talk through it. That what happens is that a lot of times that parents, it's like okay, good. What happens is it's kind of like the parents who are looking at preschool, and they want the most prestigious preschool. But what is the purpose of it? What are they looking for? And I think that has a lot to do with how parents choose schools and what schools are trying to present so that they are appealing to parents so that kids enroll in schools. So it all depends on if you're looking for prestige, then you're going to look at certain schools. If you're looking for a certain type of foundation that'll take your students, take the child further, you're looking for another school.
But how do parents come? I'm talking to you two ladies who are quite well educated, but how does the average parent even know to think that far? We had people recently on television said, please open the schools before I kill them. They've got to get out this house. They are not thinking about what I want them to in one way or the other. But how do parents
completely different situations?
It's about survival. But how do parents get the information to know about these various pathways?
Some of them know, some of them don't. Sometimes it's just, a lot of times it's just social capital.
Mm-hmm.
Who you're with, and they say, well, have you tried this school? Or my child goes to this particular school, and you say, oh, let me look into that.
Yeah.
And then you become aware of it. And then for some, you don't know about it until it's too late to know.
Yeah. What do you think, Layla?
No, I mean, I think it's similarly to Sister Amina's point about what do you want for your child? What kind of educational environment do you want for your child? And I think about my own, as someone who works in higher education, it's the same thing. How do you decide which college or university you want to attend? Is it a public school? Is it private? Is it a small liberal arts college? Is it a technical or vocational school? Our diversity of institutions speaks to the diversity of folks, but also the ways that our system is set up to reproduce itself in certain ways, that we know that depending, like you said, the social capital that people have dictates what they know about and how they know how to navigate certain systems. So it kind of reproduces some of these cycles that we see.
So aren't we then making pathways, where we're always inside of our caste? We're always going to have these pathways where we have the nose and the I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, for some people, it's intuitively they know there's better, and they're determined to find it, and they do it. But it's not something you bank on. It's not something it's not a sure bet.
Yeah.
It just happens that's how they proceed and what their life is like. For others, it may be just the complete opposite. You got me stuck here, and you know what? That's the thing.
That's pretty
and that's what happens. And then there's the whole gamut in between.
Okay, Layla, I want to go into what you study. Can you tell us a little bit more about this professional socialization of minoritization?
I don't know. I think it made my day just to hear you say that out loud.
Big words.
I don't know. That's a really good point. So what does all that mean in layman's terms or layperson's terms?
Please, because I'm laying here.
So I think one of the interesting things about the U.S. is that we push this narrative that everyone should go to college. Yeah. And college looks different, right? Every institution is not the same. The U.S. is different, and that our system was not planned in the way that it is in other countries. We have a very diverse system in terms of for-profit, not-for-profit, 2-year technical schools, 4-year residential, commuter campuses, like private, state funded, or state run, or not state run, but public institutions. So what I'm most interested in is how does the college environment impact the experiences of students who are minoritized? And I use that language because there was a phrase, we refer to particularly folks of color as minorities. And we know that that's no longer the case within the US. So the term minoritized talks about the ways that systems marginalize people, right? Versus they themselves being inherently deficient. So we talk about the ways that higher education has placed labels on entire populations of students as a way to minimize or to position them as deficits in the resources, the knowledge, the ways of being that they bring to campus. So when I think about my research and what I'm interested in is how do students learn how to be college students? Right? There's a way of being. Students come to college and we expect them just to know what office hours are. Why would they know that? There's nothing in K through 12 in most schools where a teacher would have office hours. But all of a sudden they get to college and you just expect them to know not only what they are, but what they should do when they come to office hours. How does a student learn that? Or how to engage in research. Again, they may or, we have such a diverse P through 12 system. Some students probably got through P through 12 without ever writing a research paper or ever reading a book in it from front to end. And all of a sudden they get to college and they're expected to do these things. And so I'm interested in how, particularly for Black college students, how do we teach, how do they learn how to be a college student, how to be an academic? What are the messages that they receive either from their faculty, the staff, their family members, the surrounding community about what that looks like?
Oh, I like that. No, I like minoritized because there's a lot of talk about the fact that people have been made into minorities because in the world, they're not minorities. They outnumber the population here in the United States in total. And they're
I want to be clear, it's not just about numbers, right? It's about ways of being and knowing. So we talk about epistemologies. All of a sudden that, folks in power, usually white identified or white people or whiteness, has the ability to shape what we know to be true.
Yeah.
Well, that's not always the case for everybody. So how do we make space within higher education for multiple ways of knowing?
So if you were able to give, say, Amina is still teaching, and she says, okay, Layla, well, I know what's missing in high school. Give me some pointers on what I should put there.
I have a long list. Sorry.
Give me half of it.
And I think that's one of the issues I have with our system, our educational system in the U.S. There's such a huge disconnect between college and high school. Yeah. So I only teach at the graduate level. And I even feel there's a disconnect between graduate faculty and undergraduate faculty.
Oh, yeah.
I have students who come to me and who don't understand, who are used to summarizing information. And when they come to my classes, they realize, like, I don't need a summary. I read it also. I want to hear how you're making meaning of it. Mm-hmm. Right. So when I think about, K through 12 or P through 12 education, I think we need to, Paulo Freire talked about the banking method of education. That needs to be done with. Right. We need to help our students see themselves as producers of knowledge.
Can you go back for a moment and explain Paulo Freire?
I don't want to embarrass myself.
No. I mean, who are you talking about?
No, I mean, there's this, Brazilian philosopher who has this understanding of education to be this relational, collaborative process that it's not just I'm an empty bucket to be filled, but that I'm also a producer of knowledge and that I can make meaning of the world around me and share that as also valuable, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think when students particularly come to graduate education, they're used to being talked to. And so when I tell them, tell me what you think, they're like, me? And I'm like, you've earned a whole bachelor's degree. That's supposed to mean something. And now you decided to get a master's degree. How do you make meaning of what you've learned? But if they've spent the last 16 years never being asked, what do you think about something? And all of a sudden they're in their early 20s and people are asking them for their opinion. It's a cognitive shift.
Yeah. So they should, if you were going to give Amina 4 points that she can then take back to her administrative personnel and to her colleagues in high school, we can do this, y'all.
I think to some extent that they do try that. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier just to throw out information and say, grab it, chew it, swallow. Mm-hmm. Than to say, now what did you taste? And what did you think? Mm-hmm. And how do you compare it to what you tasted yesterday? Mm-hmm. That's the harder part. I think under certain circumstances, especially under like your English and your history, primarily where it's more flexible than your hard sciences and math.
Okay.
Although even there's a space
Mm-hmm.
for opinion and to think and to understand and make meaning even there.
Yes.
But more often it's in the social sciences and the like political science, history, those particular areas. But they do try, but and then it's also difficult because that's the time of development where some young people have a firm grasp of abstract ideas, and others are just beginning to realize that they can think them.
Mm-hmm.
So when they come into college, for some of them, it's yeah, I've done this and I can continue to do it. And for others, it's like I can, and they're just realizing that they can think better
Mm-hmm.
because development is it's different for every child and depending on how they've been encouraged, who's been encouraging them, if they've been interested in being encouraged.
Mm-hmm.
All of that comes into play
Mm-hmm.
when they're developing those skills.
So, what are we gonna do? I'm listening to you telling me about. Hmm. I have no clue about educational philosophy, but let me work it out here. Well, no, let me not work it out here because that isn't gonna go anywhere either. Um, you all seem to be saying that a bunch of individuals go to school
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch of individuals should be somehow taught to share their individualism with a community, a society, a bigger place. Why would I want to do that when you've spent all this time talking about me as an individual? Why would I even want to share my classroom with a slow learner? Somebody that has one of those alphabet syndromes, ADPQ, whatever it is.
And I'd come back and
And
say,
they have to take medicine to even be able to sit in the seat, or somebody who is no, that's not nice. I can't
see,
say that on it.
and my
Who is
answer
murderous.
medicine is so.
Right. She's trying to get our pressure up.
I know.
I am. I am.
Trying to get our pressure up because
Because I
But
am
I say
the end of.
so they take medicine.
Mhm.
What's wrong with
But
that?
I don't want to be sitting next to no drug addict.
Well, you're probably going out and smoke a little something later too. So,
What?
what's the matter?
I did what?
I said you probably gonna go out and smoke a little something too.
Yeah, well, I probably would need to if I went in some of these classrooms. But I got to go. Don't look at me like that, Layla. I got to go to school. School is now a prison with metal detectors. I got armed officers in some places in the halls. At school, we already know has its own system of surveillance that it inculcates in every individual there. You're always being surveilled. Somebody must know where you are every moment of the day. If there's a creative bone,
I wouldn't
I'm
want that.
into squelching.
For high school, you do want to know where they are. Um,
Come
but
on now.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, right? Like, I don't think that police officers should be in schools, right? I don't think there's a place for that. What does that say about the learning environment? You know, I talked earlier about finding out that my son would be learning from home and how I wanted to set up his learning environment. I don't think there should be police officers in school. What does that communicate to students about education?
Right.
Right? We're
I
thinking
think
about setting
also,
people up.
I think too, we're asking the wrong question. The question isn't why are police officers? It's how did they get there? Not
Mm,
why. What happened so that we feel that we need to
mhm,
have some type of security
mhm,
inside of a school all day long. I understand the need. The idea is, I think, even more than surveillance. It's the idea of protecting the majority from the minority that would harm them.
Okay, but let me give you an example. Over here, I'm in Chicago at the University of Chicago. 20 years ago, one white physician was coming home from work. A young black man in a crossway scared her. She reported it to her husband and demanded that he talk to campus security. The campus security decided, oh my goodness, we can't have that. Because if you know anything about Chicago, you know the University of Chicago sits in the middle of loads of disparities of black and brown people. Now, because of that one instance, University of Chicago has the largest personal police force in this country. So we can talk about how it got there, but how it got there is often bound up in that word I can't pronounce, marginalizations of peoples. You know, it's bound up in issues of race and class, where instances may or may not be true. When I can turn on the TV and see a kindergartner handcuffed and being put in the back of a police wagon.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Because basically what's the handcuff for?
I don't know. You know the man. Hey, wait. Her arms were so small. He had to hold her arms in the handcuffs because her arms were too tiny.
Yeah, because what's the idea? Why do you bind people? Bound people. What's the purpose behind that? And then you've got to wonder. I know that I've seen students going out in handcuffs, not because that they're a threat to the police officers themselves or anybody else around, because it makes a great statement about don't you do what they did.
I think it also brings us back to your initial question about the diversity of learners in a space and the stigmatization of certain populations of students, right? Which we know are bound up in anti-Blackness within the US. Our assumption that Black folks in particular are inherently criminal and not able to learn, right? So this criminalization, particularly of Black students and Black girls in particular, is really just a manifestation of larger societal issues and understandings about Black people, right? So it's absolutely disgusting and hard to think about a child being, in handcuffs. But when you understand how anti-Blackness works in the US, you're not surprised by it, right? If you always see this population of people as a problem to be monitored, to be controlled, to be fixed, then the policies and practices that are implemented make sense for that, right? So how do we get to the point where education is a practice of freedom, as Bell Hooks would say, right? That education is a place of liberation, right? Not as a site of, not as a prison, right? Or as both a literal and a intellectual prison, right? So what are we educating people for? But also what are we saying about the physical space and what happens in there? So for me, at the college level, teaching students, or at the graduate level, teaching students who have intellectual or learning differences, to me, that's not a problem because we're human beings. We all move through the world in different ways. And whatever I do for the student who needs like the most support, so to say, all of my students benefit from it. Most of the accommodations at the college or graduate level are around maybe getting notes ahead of time or PowerPoints or additional time for an assignment. Particularly around COVID, I tell students, you're tired, I'm tired. When you don't read it, I don't want to read it. So I'm going to give you extra time so that you can give me. I'd rather give you the extra time that you need to get me something that will make it easier for me to grade. Because I have one class of 24 students, and I said, the last thing I want to read is 24 7-page papers that are garbage because you're exhausted. Take the time you need. right? And so we need to reimagine, in my opinion, higher education and our understandings of what it can look like. And I think COVID in particular has provided opportunities for me as a faculty member to kind of do that and say like, okay, do I need this due date? I'm not going to look at it till the weekend anyway. So if you get it to me on Friday, I could care less. Why would I give you a penalty for needing more time? What does that do for me? I already have my degree. So me penalizing you now, I know some people like, well, I've had faculty colleagues say, well, that sounds like chaos. Chaos for who? How do you understand chaos? Why would I want my students to be stressed out about getting an assignment to me when they can take a few extra days and give me something that's really beautiful? Right? So
Okay,
again,
well, let's put that in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
The doctor has to finish the operation.
Mm-hmm.
Now I can give him more time.
That's two different things. A doctor finishing operation and me grading papers are two different things.
Why?
Because I have flexibility. Someone's life is not on the line with me grading an assignment. Not at all. And if it is, then we'll imagine it. I guess what I'm saying is my desire to control my students does nothing at the end of the day.
What,
in my opinion.
The other thing is when you talk about education and freedom, one could argue that what you're getting inside of many schools cannot be deemed as education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So
sure.
I mean, it's, when you talk about being educated and being free, it's that knowledge helps to expand, and so enhances or expands your horizons, and that does not necessarily happen inside of school systems in at least America. I can't speak for the other parts of the world, but in America, definitely Illinois.
Layla's smiling because she's getting ready to get let loose. But let me give each of you 30 seconds of a last statement. I will feel free to call on you again because the issues with education as we go back into lockdown in some places across the country are critical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Age before beauty. Layla, go.
No pressure. I think particularly for higher education, the thing that I think about with my students is we cannot create everything for, I've taught online all semester, 3 courses. You cannot take a face-to-face class and put it online. You should not be trying to recreate what you would do in person online. It doesn't make sense for you. It doesn't make sense for the students. I've heard stories of students, it's a 2.5-hour course. Their instructor is expecting them to be online for 2.5 hours the way they would be in class. Now I've kind of done that in some of my classes, but I throw in breaks. I'm not lecturing for 2.5 hours. I'm trying to mix up the ways that I'm communicating with students, but I'm also mindful of their energy because I'm mindful of mine. I'm a human being too. Like just because I'm on the other side of the screen, I'm also mindful of the ways that we're being taxed. So I think for higher education in particular, we need to reimagine what our content delivery looks like in this, because we're going to be in this for a while. COVID is not going away. Even if this vaccine is not going to magically go away, we need to think about, face-to-face is face-to-face. Online is online. Also, as we're preparing faculty to go out, we need to make sure that we're training. Here's the other issue with PhD programs. I am a scholar in my field, and it just so happens my discipline is higher education. So my specialization was teaching and learning. Everyone who gets a PhD does not learn how to teach, and we are well aware of that. And so there needs to be an emphasis on preparing folks, if they want to teach, how to do that. So whether it's pedagogy, andragogy, if you're thinking about teaching adults, what does that look like, particularly face-to-face, and the difference in online? They should not be the same.
Amina, you got less than 30 seconds.
Oh, man.
Sorry.
So I mean, my final words would be that what I think education needs is for teachers, parents, students, and all of the administrators and all of the politicians to stop thinking of education as let's do just enough. Why don't we get back to the idea of excellence? Excellent. Going not just being at the standard, but how far above the standard can you go? And I think that is maybe one of the major things that has created what we have today, is that we've forgotten to look for and to strive for excellence.
Okay, I'm going to have to end. This is Professor Amanal Dean. I've been with Layla McLeod and Amina Mitchell. We've been discussing some of the issues, not all, but some of the issues, really critical issues about where we are with regard to education. I want to thank you. This is Critical Talk, a production of Muslim Network TV. I'm going to ask my guests to hang out for a moment.
Thank you.